So, I've been working on my TTRPG Frontier. It has definitely gone through some huge changes since my last video on it, including being renamed from Cosmos to Frontier. I needed playtesting, but because no one came through itch.io or YouTube, I went to the place I should have first, Reddit. I got some good feedback and I'm still working on it. Needless to say, I would love to present to you today the new and improved Frontier. To cover everything, I would like to go over four things: my documents layout, skill checks, combat, and magic. Before that, though, I would like to go over the other versions I went through to land on this one. 1. Cosmos. I already talked about this version in my previous videos. In short, it is 2 editions and was the worst written version. Frontier, setting TTRPG. For a short time, I was building Frontier specifically for my setting I'm developing. Yes, I might make a video about it. 3. Frontier, hyper-focused on survival exploration. After hearing from Reddit that my TTRPG wasn't special enough and didn't have anything interesting, I made it into a survival exploration game. Unfortunately, the TTRPG I picture in my mind is high fantasy, and I subconsciously tried to fit my wants into this, which made it worse. Frontier, the version now. After experiencing how bad the last version was, I went back to making it a high fantasy game. This time, I made it special using specialization in that game genre, instead of going to another genre entirely. Now, I'll get into detail with this in the rest of the video. For my new game version's layout, it's still pretty fluid right now. I've come up with what I think is the best way to spread information and help it make sense for the reader. I put the chapters in this order: introductory, then basics, then playing the game, then character building. Then there are a bunch of smaller sections in these chapters. The next thing to go over is skill checks. I completely revamped my ability check system, so now instead of having one ability score, you have 5 skills and 5 weaknesses. They each have an attribute score that represents how much more proficient or terrible you are with a skill than average. If if something isn't listed as a skill or a weakness, it is assumed that your character is average at that thing. Writing the script and thinking about how it was versus how it is now, I'm thinking that I might like the old one better. In fact, by the time this video is released, it will probably just be one ability score anyway. Anyway, with skill checks, you roll d12 and decide based on your skills and weaknesses whether or not you succeed at your action. This can be for a lot of things, and there's also advantage and disadvantage. The final thing to go over is combat. This one has had probably the most substantial change to it, not just in its mechanics, but its actual premise and heart. Originally, combat was a side note with little thought. Because I was learning travel as my main mechanic, I because I was leaving travel as my main mechanic, I went to combat. I decided that instead of something bland, it would be more like role playing and include those elements. I show and do this for a lot of combat mechanics, which I switched to prize cinematics and descriptive roleplay. First, you got the basis for all combat: initiative. In my first initiative system so far, you decide all your attacks and roll for them at the same time. Then you go from most to least damage and act out your turns. Monsters in large groups can roll a single d8, with that representing their place in initiative. And the GM would then decide what order they go in, not by a dice roll, although they can choose to, but, with what suits the monsters. The next mechanic is attacking. I kept this the same as last time, which combined the attack roll and damage roll. For all people who don't know these terms, I mean the die roll attempting to hit something and the die roll attempting to, chop off somebody's arm or hurt them. For example, for a common short sword, you would roll d6. If you roll a 1, you would miss. If you roll anything but a 1, then you will hit your target. Disadvantage and advantage goals also be applied to this, of course. I also added parrying, which is almost the same exact thing, except for you roll if your chosen parrying weapons die, and if it gets above or equal to your opponent's, you don't take any damage. If you roll under your opponent, then you take the damage and they get advantage on their attack on you their next turn. The second new mechanic is something I call spotlight moments, which are triggered when you get the final hit on an enemy or otherwise do something cool. It's not really that mechanically crazy, it is just really just like a way to encourage players to describe their cool moments instead of keeping them constrained to numbers. Finally, for combat, we got heroic actions. This was already in there, and I thought this fit this new combat very well, so I kept it in the way it was. The only thing I changed were the heroic action choices themselves, which were pretty lame. I've mostly taken common heroic stuff, tropes from fantasy media, and slapped it in as a feature. For example, one choice is take the blow, in which you heroically hop in front of your friends to take to take an attack that would have hit them. It's even cooler if you die, so you have this whole sad roleplay moment like, don't lose! Don't let me lose you! Don't let go! I have to go to light. Now, one of the hugest things I did was remove magic. I was definitely working with some spells, and I made a whole flexible point system for casting them, but I felt like it was clunky and it didn't fit this new vibe. Now, as an extra, I also added some extra minor stuff effects, currency, and most of all, GM notes in almost all the sections. After all, GMs have a job to do. I got into detail with this stuff because I thought it was kind of important, but I think I'll place it in a section called like optional or something so people know it's important. This is, of course, except for GM notes, which are incredibly important. Thank you for watching, and I hope you'll click with that like and subscribe button to support this work. I would, though, like to remind you that I will be making some huge changes and be adding a lot of stuff, so this isn't probably what it will be like when releasing the full TTRPG for the first time. Now, have fun living large and laughing easy, a giant bard, obviously, and goodbye!